Hi everyone, welcome back to More English with Dry. Today we're going to be taking a look at the AQA Love and Relationships poem The Farmer's Bride by Charlotte Mew. It's worth me saying before we begin that the ending of this poem especially can be quite troubling. It contains some very serious and dark subject matter, so please make sure that if you're in any way confused by what you read or in any way upset by it, that you find a teacher or your parents and speak to them about it. Now, the first thing to note is that the poem is written in the voice of a farmer, a rural worker from the time period in which Mew was writing. She adopts this persona, and so every time we refer to the speaker, this is who we mean. The opinions are obviously not those shared by Mew. She is presenting a character that we are designed to listen to and to hear their side of what they are describing. The poem begins with the farmer telling us about how he recently got married. The opening line establishes, however, a power dynamic between the farmer and his bride. It confirms, along with the title, that he holds complete power over her. The fact that he chose the wife implies that she is more of an object to him than a person, and that her feelings were unlikely to have been taken into consideration before their wedding. This would have been absolutely the same with a lot of marriages in this time period, particularly away from urban centres and in slightly more backward rural zones. It would have been a very patriarchal society in which women had very little choice and very little of a say in who they eventually ended up marrying to. Marriage was considered more about necessity than it was about an act of love. The farmer goes on to admit that she was possibly too young and childish to have gotten married. He admits this and talks about how it may have been a traumatic ordeal for her. Now, as a result, the bride responds by turning afraid from all human contact. She certainly responds very poorly to him. This could imply that she was totally out of her depth when she got married to the farmer, and the response that she has is exactly what we would expect from somebody entirely scared of what they were doing. We then hear about how she is like a frightened little fae, indeed more like that than she is a person. Now, this similarly emphasises again the childishness of the bride. A fae is a mythical creature similar to a fairy, and it reinforces how small, how timid she was, and therefore how far away from being like a fully grown adult woman. It also reminds us of nature and the natural world, and it hints at something that will come later, which is that the wife is much more comfortable outside of the company of humanity. As a result of this fear and feeling as though she's trapped in this marriage, the bride runs away. We're told this in the line where the farmer describes her as having runned away. Now, this is an important expression because it hints at the farmer's lack of education. He's possibly somewhat illiterate. Now, this is possibly part of the reason why he is such a bad husband and has so little idea of how to look after his wife on an emotional level. Either way, she flees in the night and runs away from him. In the beginning of the second stanza, he describes how she should properly have been abed. In this instance, this means that she should have been in bed. Now, the double meaning here is clear, that he believes that women's role was twofold within a marriage. Firstly, it was to provide him, the husband, with children that would eventually help him work the farm, but also to satisfy his desires sexually. This reinforces the patriarchal view that he would have had over the society he was living in. Indeed, as we carry on, the bride, who is clearly miserable, is caught and brought back. Now, this reinforces the patriarchal nature of this society, the fact that the union would have been condoned by the other villagers rather than disapproved of, so much so that they chase her down together, almost as though they are dogs hunting a fox. Now, this animal imagery is repeatedly throughout this poem. In the first instance here, she's described as flying like a hare. Now, this is one of many small, timid creatures that she's likened to, which further adds to the image of her being a delicate person. Indeed, fitting in with what I said about them being like a pack of dogs, they all indicate that she is in some way prey, and this positions him as being a predatory hunter rather than a loving husband. Indeed, they successfully catch her and bring her home, and as a result, lock her up in the house. She is no longer allowed out and is effectively caged. It further reinforces how little he is able to look after his wife or appeal to her on a human level. The third stanza opens with him comparing her again to being like a mouse, another tiny, innocent creature. The farmer also shows that he sees his wife as scurrying around the house, trying desperately to go unnoticed and undisturbed by him. Mice, particularly, are scared of humans, and this further reminds the reader that she is scared of him. We hear that she is happy enough to chat and play with birds and rabbits, indicating that she finds more of a natural affinity with these creatures. This could suggest that her fear has become so great that she totally withdraws from the world, abandoning a society that's cruelly sold her into marriage at a young age to become the virtual slave of a much older man. She can only bear to be with these animals, who in no way judge her and who ask nothing of her. Indeed, she is almost without a voice, unable to speak to him. Her eyes clearly demonstrate how little she wants to be near her husband, but she's unable to articulate this verbally. In fact, we hear that her eyes beseech this, not near, not near, which implies that she is almost begging, the word beseeching having strong connotations of asking beyond the point of any sort of reason for someone to do something that someone is asking. And this also shows the absence of power that she has, and the strength of her desire not to have anything to do with him. Moving forward, the farmer begins to reflect on how she acts towards him. We get a sense for the first time of his growing frustration at the fact she refuses to acknowledge him and refuses to requite any of his desires. He comments in the rhetorical question, "But what to me?" asking what her role should be towards him, and it implies that he is thinking about what she owes him as a wife. And the repetition of the sibilant S sound in the beginning of this stanza could show this frustration quite literally, and also his unfulfilled desire. Indeed, the poem is starting to take place in a winter setting. The seasons are moving on, and we start to hear about the days shortening. The pathetic fallacy here creates a dark and ominous tone, suggesting that the farmer's emotions are darkening also. Furthermore, as winter comes, work on the farm would naturally slow down, meaning that he has more time to spend at home, dwelling on his wife, and the fact that she flat out refuses to go anywhere near him. Indeed, as this stanza ends, he begins to focus on the fact that she is yet to provide him with children. He thinks about how much better Christmas time would be if there were others in the house, implying a family that he wishes to have. The denial of him makes him increasingly agitated, especially when he considers Christmas the celebration of the birth of a child. As mentioned, the final stanza is quite troubling, and there are several interpretations of it. It is an ambiguous ending, and yet the most common way of reading it is that he goes up the stairs to the attic with the intention of raping his bride. The implication here is that he's become fed up of waiting for what he believes she owes him as a wife, and decides to take it by force. As you can see, the final stanza is completely fractured grammatically. There are commas and semicolons and exclamation marks all throughout the lines, implying that he has become frantic and erratic. It reflects how he has lost patience entirely with his wife, and how his desire is starting to overcome him. Indeed, his lust is shown as he starts to use animal imagery again, but in this case, it shows him as being a predator who views his wife as nothing more than an animal. By referring to her hair as young down, it both reinforces how young and innocent she is, but also shows that his desire is bestial and subhuman. It also reinforces his lack of emotional development. He is the product of a poorly educated society that taught men their wives were their property. He's failed to connect with her on an emotional and intellectual level, and so he is resorting to treating her as though she is one of his farm animals. The final line ends with him endlessly repeating the same words, her hair, her hair. Specifically, this shows his pure lust at this moment. He cannot think coherently enough to write logically. The exclamation marks further reinforce the frenzy he's worked himself into, and the violent and aggressive act that it seems inevitably he will carry out. I hope this video was helpful to you. As mentioned, there are some troubling things towards the end, and if you feel in any way upset by them, or you want to speak further with them about somebody, please make sure you find an adult to do that with. I hope this video has been helpful. Take care, and I'll see you next time.